This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about something quieter and more dangerous. What happens when power stops pretending it's neutral? When money meant to move through a system starts stopping, not because the law changed, but because loyalty did. You were told federal government works by rules, by formulas, by boring processes no one needs to watch closely. That assumption is no longer safe. Because somewhere along the way, funding stopped being policy, it became leverage. And leverage became punishment, not announced, not debated, just applied. Most people never see it. They only feel the delay, the denial, the sudden absence of things that used to arrive on time. If you want to understand what's actually being tested right now, not politically, but structurally, stay with me. Because this isn't about who's in charge. It's about what happens when the system learns at times can choose sides, asterisk. And once it learns that, it doesn't forget. You think the system is run by people, by personalities, by whoever is loudest on a given day. That's the comforting version. The real control point is quieter. It's procedural. It's the moment where a decision is supposed to be automatic and suddenly isn't. Money moves through government the way blood moves through a body, not by passion, by rules. Appropriations, formulas. Grants that are supposed to be boring precisely so they can't be manipulated. But when those rules stop being treated as obligations, when they're treated as options, something fundamental shifts. Power no longer needs to argue. It only needs to delay or freeze or quietly reconsider. Nothing has to be announced. No law has to change. The system still looks intact from the outside. Congress passes funding. Agencies exist. Projects are approved. And yet, somewhere between approval and arrival, the flow becomes selective. That selectivity is the control. And once you see times that choice is made, you start to understand why the fights ahead won't look dramatic at first. They'll look administrative. For a long time, this system worked because it moved slowly, deliberately, predictably, before money moved, whether anyone liked you or not. It moved because the law said it had to, because neutrality was the feature, not the flaw. Now compare that to now. Movement requires discretion. Reviews, pauses, additional consideration. Nothing dramatic, nothing that triggers alarms, just enough friction to change outcomes. This is the most dangerous kind of shift, not a coup, a normalization. Because when something changes all at once, people notice. When it changes by half steps, they adapt. Before, disagreement ended at the ballot box. After, disagreement follows you into budgets, into timelines, into whether a project ever quite finishes. What used to be guaranteed becomes conditional, quietly. And the people affected aren't told they're being punished. They're told there's a delay, a review, a technical issue, but the effect is the same. This is how a system teaches itself a new habit. Slowly enough that no one agrees on when it started. Fast enough that reversing it becomes complicated. And that's where the first real shock appears. At some point, the abstraction breaks. Because this doesn't stay theoretical. Billions of dollars, already approved, already promised, suddenly marked for removal, not because the projects failed, not because the law changed, but because the map did. Entire categories of funding, energy, infrastructure were targeted to disappear in certain places and not others. Same country, same statutes, different treatment. And here's the part that matters. This wasn't subtle. The criteria wasn't hidden in spreadsheets or footnotes. It was stated out loud, which is why the system reacted. Court stepped in and said, no, not slow down, not revise. Illegal. Projects that were supposed to be shut down kept going. Money that was supposed to be starved was released. Not because of mercy, because of law. If you're wondering why judges suddenly matter so much in fights that don't look judicial, this is why. Because when enforcement becomes selective, the only thing standing between a functioning state and a loyalty-based one is someone willing to say, stop. Pay attention to that word, stop. Because it doesn't always hold, and the next test wasn't about infrastructure. Here's what connects all of this. The damage doesn't come from one cut. It comes from how the system is wired to absorb cuts. Federal funding isn't just money. It's timing. It's dependency. It's an assumption built into payrolls, contracts, childcare slots, clinic hours. When funds are frozen, even briefly, the cost doesn't land on the decision maker. It lands downstream. States can't replace billions overnight. Nonprofits can't pause services without consequences. Families don't get a warning. And the people who benefit from this design aren't the ones who feel the disruption. They sit upstream, insulated by discretion. They apply reviews. They issue holds. The pain is diffused, fragmented, hard to trace back to a single choice. That's the mechanism. You don't need to cancel the program. You just need to interrupt the flow long enough for someone else to absorb the shock. Courts can reverse decisions. They can order funds released, but they can't rewind the missed paycheck. Or the closed childcare slot. Or the week a clinic shut its doors. And once you see that, you see why the next phase escalates faster. Because after infrastructure, the target wasn't projects. It was people. This is where the tempo changes. Shorter sentences, less abstraction, more force. Funding meant for children, for care, for basic stability, frozen, not because of fraud, not because of misuse, but because of who governed where, billions, paused. Childcare centers don't have reserves. Social services don't have buffers. When the money stops, they don't argue ideology. They close rooms. They cut hours. They turn people away. Courts intervened again, blocked it, declared it unlawful. But understand the lag. Even a temporary freeze ripples. Parents miss work. Employers lose staff. Families scramble. And the message lands whether the money comes back or not. The message is, this can happen again. That uncertainty is the escalation. It trains everyone downstream to anticipate punishment, to hedge, to comply quietly next time. Because when survival is conditional, resistance becomes expensive. And just when it looked like this strategy might hit a limit, when courts kept saying no, the focus shifted again, away from states, toward voices. At this point, it reaches you, not as a headline, as a constraint. You don't get a notice saying funding was weaponized. You get a longer wait list, a canceled appointment, a program that used to exist and suddenly doesn't. You adjust because you have to. That's how the system counts on your silence. By making the cost of speaking higher than the cost of adapting, professional groups learn it, advocates learn it, researchers learn it. Criticism starts to feel risky. Not illegal, just expensive. Courts can step in after the fact. They can say retaliation isn't allowed. They can order money restored, but they can't undo the lesson that was taught. And once people internalize that lesson, the system doesn't need to punish everyone, just enough to be believed. If you've ever wondered why institutions grow quieter over time, why dissent softens, why warnings turn into footnotes, this is why. Stay with me. Because what happens next isn't about individuals learning this lesson. It's about systems exporting it. This doesn't stay contained. Because systems like this don't respect borders. They propagate. Once selective enforcement works in one place, it becomes a template. Other governments watch. Other leaders notice. Not the speeches, the mechanics. They see how pressure can be applied without tanks, without laws, without announcements. Just funding, timing, administrative silence, and the effects travel, supply chains hesitate, international projects stall. Alliances start recalculating risk not based on treaties, but on predictability. Because when a system proves it can change terms midstream, trust erodes quietly. not all at once, not dramatically. Partners start building redundancies, alternatives, ways to operate with less exposure. That's not punishment. That's adaptation. And once adaptation begins, the system that relied on central coordination loses leverage. Influence becomes thinner, more conditional. What looked like strength, the ability to withhold, starts to hollow out the very networks that made coordination possible. And that's the moment the future stops being theoretical, because from here, there are only a few paths forward. None of them are stable by default. From here, the system accelerates, not in one direction. In 3, the first path is adjustment. Institutions harden. Courts move faster. Congress asserts itself earlier. Rules get clarified. Discretion narrows. The system absorbs the shock and rewires just enough to prevent repeat damage. Everything still works, but it works defensively now. The second path is erosion. Selective enforcement never fully stops. It just gets quieter, more procedural, less explicit. People adapt around it. States hedge. Organizations self-censor. The system technically holds, but neutrality becomes conditional, uneven, unreliable, and then there's rupture. That's when discretion outpaces resistance. When courts are delayed, when legislative margins vanish, when enforcement becomes openly transactional, not hidden, not denied, just expected. None of these paths announce themselves. They unfold through budgets, delays, staffing decisions, through what moves and what doesn't. And here's the part that matters most. The future doesn't choose one path all at once. It oscillates. Adjustment in one sector, erosion in another, pressure building where no one is watching, which means the question isn't what will happen, it's what will be tolerated long enough to become permanent. Because once a system learns, it can choose sides. Unlearning, that is the hardest part. What matters now is not outrage and not reassurance, because the system isn't breaking loudly anymore. It's negotiating with itself. Every time a court says no, the boundary holds for now. Every time Congress intervenes, the damage pauses but doesn't disappear. The danger isn't collapse, it's precedent. A future where neutrality exists on paper, but movement depends on alignment. Where funding technically flows, but only after friction teaches the right lessons. Where no one needs to issue orders because everyone already understands the cost of noncompliance. That kind of system doesn't feel authoritarian. It feels administrative, boring, plausible, which is why it survives scrutiny. If you stop watching, nothing explodes. Things just change shape, quietly, permanently. So don't look for villains. Look for patterns. Look for what becomes routine, because the most important fights ahead won't happen in elections or speeches. They'll happen in delays you're told not to worry about, in pauses that never quite get explained. This story isn't over. It's stabilizing. And the next chapter is about what happens when resistance itself becomes normal and whether that's enough. If you want to follow where this goes next, stay close. Because once you see the system choosing sides, you can't unsee it.